Hello and welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. My name is Laura Bradburn. It's Friday, it's a glorious sunny day outside, and here we are all locked up ready to talk all things Celtic. I'm joined as always by Tony Haggerty. How are you doing, Tony?
I'm very well, yourself, Laura?
Yes, not too bad. And King Jim Orr, how are you doing, Jim?
Good, Laura, thank you. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Ready to get talking, although there's a bit of confusion going on today about where we are. It's a bit of a chicken and an egg situation as far as the whole management director of football thing is concerned, and who's coming in first and who wants to get in ahead of who and who's picking what. But we'll get into that in due course. So for anybody who's been living under a rock, I presume if you're watching this you kind of are up to speed with what's going on, but the current situation is it looks like we're only hours perhaps away from announcing Eddie Howe as manager. Certainly, according to the papers, has been in talks with Celtic about making the move north of the border to get back into management after a few months, even maybe a year out of management with Bournemouth. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk to Tony a little bit about, what's behind all these stories, how the journalists managed to confirm what they confirmed, because as we all know, we were sitting here pretty certain last week it was going to be Roy Keane. Now we're pretty certain it's going to be Eddie Howe, so we'll get into that. We've got some conversation around nostalgia and how it affects Celtic and their recruitment policy, and a little bit about the rumours of Kieran Tierney to Man City and what that means for Celtic going forward and how it might change our process for developing young players. But we'll get started. Tony, I'll come to you first. I spoke to you on messages before we came onto the podcast today, and I was talking to you about, we were pretty certain this time last week that Roy Keane was going to be manager. The sources that were quoting it were pretty certain. They are now speaking with equal certainty about Eddie Howe. So what I wanted to get from you, obviously your past as a journalist for the Daily Record, you'll know how these things work. How certain are the journalists when they put these stories out there that what they have is truth, or are they just going on what they think is a hook for people to buy the papers? How much can we rely basically on what we're reading?
I think in terms of the Keane one was an interesting one. I thought that was maybe put out there to see the reaction from the Celtic supporters.
Right.
And universally, most people weren't on the Keane bus, apart from Russell Boyce, by the sound of it. So, you can use and manipulate the media to suit, so maybe get that message out there and see what the groundswell of opinion was, whilst at the same time working on the fact that Eddie Howe might have been your number one candidate. Now, I'm giving Celtic the benefit of the doubt here and saying that they've been shrewd in that sense. You don't dissuade people from saying that Keane's going to be the next manager. Don't confirm or deny, but you don't dissuade them from putting that narrative out there. Whilst your eyes on your number one candidate all along, which is how right. Now, I spoke to you about yesterday would have been a great day to be a newspaper man.
Yeah.
That's a ever-changing sequence of events, right? Howe's in talks with Celtic, or he's had talks. So as a newspaper man, you want to take that on. So how do you take it on? Well, the first one that took it on was, I think, the Daily Record that said he'd knocked back Sheffield United.
Yeah.
You get information like that. Now, you go in the morning, I'm saying you get in the office, but people working at home, but you say, right, Eddie Howe's supposedly the man, right? You clatter your phones, people that work with Eddie Howe, people that know Eddie Howe, if you get any contacts from Bournemouth or Burnley or anybody, right, who, and if they're Scottish, all the better. Somebody like Peter Grant, who played with him for 2 years, maybe give you a website, that kind of thing, right? Maybe tell you something, might still keep in contact with Howe. So through that kind of network of contacts, the Daily Record have written a story and put it out there because the information won't keep till the next day. that Eddie Howe has knocked back Sheffield United. So he's clearly keen on the Celtic job if he's knocking back jobs in England. And then further to that, the Sun, I think it was, that then said that there was a meeting between Dermot Desmond, Eddie Howe and Peter Lawwell in London. I believe that's the chronology of events. Now that's top-notch journalism. That's somebody who's got a right contact there, because only 3 people know that meeting's happening, and that's the 3 protagonists that are at the meeting. But once you're at a secret location in London, somebody will see you at that secret location in London.
Yes.
So then that's how it spirals. They tell somebody. But if you're in that football business, you have football contacts at high levels. And if you know a piece of information, you want to tell somebody, because you want to be that in the know person. And within minutes, it'll filter down to journalists, because they're the people that are kind of football people, football journalists, because it's just the way it works. This is how it works. So that stories came out, and so you think, okay, so if you're working in a newspaper, so right, we need to see what comes from that. Who does he want in? What's the stumbling block? What's next? And then it was the Daily Mail that ran the story today. Richard Hughes. He wants Richard Hughes as a technical director. That's Richard Hughes, who played for Bournemouth and has, a relationship with Eddie Howe. So that's the new name. So it's gone from being he's knocked back Sheffield United to this meeting in London to Richard Hughes coming possibly as a technical director. So that's how it all works journalistically. It's a constantly moving story. Years ago, these would have held to the next day. So the next day's Daily Record would have been he's knocked back Sheffield United, that kind of thing. Or the next day's Sun would have been this secret meeting. The next day's Mail would have been Richard Hughes, that kind of thing. Because of the nature of role news, you've got to get that out there now. That's
what I was going to say, just to jump in and ask you while you're on that. I don't mean to denigrate journalism in any way, but I'm looking for your opinion as a journalist. Do you think pressure on journalists to get the story out there sometimes affects the accuracy of it, that they've got to then backpedal at a later point because they've been so desperate to get there first?
Of course it does, but as I've just said, if you've got a piece of information, you trust that source, then you're going to run with it, i.e. Roy Keane's going to be the next Celtic manager. You can't possibly sit on that if someone that you trust and you feel is close enough to a football club or close enough to the people in power at a football club have given you that information. You go to your editor and say, I'm hearing Roy Keane's going to be the new manager of Celtic. Will we sit in it? They're like, no, you get it out there. And they're right for a while, but you have to caveat that with, he might be, that they're erring towards Keane, or Roy Keane's closing in on the Celtic job, that kind of thing. That's how you would. But if you're going to nail your colours to the match, say Roy Keane's going to be the next Celtic manager, you need to be 100%. So yeah, sometimes your call journalistically comes into question. It's a judgment call, And if you're 100% and you trust that source, then you don't believe that they would tell you something that's not true. But not everything you're told is true. Yeah. So and you know that yourself. So that's why sometimes you can be made to look silly newspaper-wise. But tell me somebody that wouldn't print that story. If somebody said,
absolutely,
he's going to be the next Celtic manager, and if Celtic don't need to confirm or deny that. You just need to have a nod and a wink, say, and you'll go with that. Because it might be true, it might not be true. But if you frame it in a way that you can turn and say, well, we did say they were maybe looking at other candidates, or that kind of thing. So that's how you frame that narrative journalistically. But yesterday, I think, was an example of 3 really good pieces of journalism from the Record, the Sun, and the Mail in terms of moving that story forward. Because everybody can put out, Eddie Howe's in talks, but what they can't do is say what those talks are about, technical directors, and the fact that he's not back Sheffield United. So people have their opinions in journalists, and I get that, and a lot of Celtic supporters, are not au fait with the media in this country. But yesterday was an example of good journalism, and I've said that before. I am a journalist, and I'll defend them, but I'll also say when they're not playing the game. But yesterday was an example of 3 newspapers producing solid pieces of journalism. I would say people want to try that, then so be it.
Yeah. Jim, just to come to you on that point, obviously Tony's got the luxury of knowing how the sausage is made, so to speak, and being aware of the kind of how the cogs turn and how the machine works. From a Celtic supporter's point of view, like you, does it concern you? Does it upset you? How does it make you feel to know that, you know, in a certain situation, perhaps Dermot Desmond has used the media as a kind of measuring stick or a temperature valve for how the Celtic support feel about Roy Keane? Perhaps that he's used the media to leak that story just to gauge how Celtic supporters would react to that appointment?
I thought that was a very interesting few minutes from Tony there, because I think as football fans, we're quite simplistic. I mean, I think we'll sit here and make comments about things that we really don't know much about. We're just kind of guessing at things. And I think we've got a simplistic view towards the media. We've got a simplistic view towards the football as well. And I think what we tend not to do is we tend not to compare football with normal life. And when people are trying to get jobs, we go through a completely different process. You know, you'd never imagine trying to get a job, a normal job, and having to deal with some of the stuff that we're saying here. I mean, how do you feel if you're Roy Keane and you're used as a bit of a pawn here? You know, so I think that's quite an interesting angle. But I think as long as we come up with the right man at the end of the day, I mean, I've been on the podcast now for just over 6 months, and this is the first time I've been genuinely excited about something. This is my excited face, which looks like my sad face as well. But genuinely, for the first time, I'm excited because I thought there was a kind of top tier of managers who were just not gettable. And Eddie Howe was in that top tier. And we were here last Friday, as you say, to Laura thinking it's Roy Keane. And you're thinking this is a disaster. And you would, and if you get the job, you would obviously back him as the Celtic manager. But you thought this is not the right way to go. And I think we've done our due diligence this time. We didn't do it last time, which is good. And you'd also expect any good manager worth his salt to do his due diligence. So I don't mind if it takes a bit longer to be done. I think because you have to announce these kind of major appointments to the Stock Exchange, I don't think anything will happen until Tuesday morning at the very earliest. But I think there's still a bit of work to be done. I don't think Eddie Howe's a done deal. And until you see Eddie Howe on the Celtic Park pitch with the scarf above his head, I think anything could happen. And even if you look back to the infamous Morris Johnson incident, even that wasn't finished or over the line. So I think it's cautious. I think we should be cautious and just wait. I think we've all been following Celtic long enough to know that these things aren't done deal. But from my point of view, I think it's a fantastic appointment if we get over the line and give Eddie Howe what he needs, because he's not going to come cheap. I think we need to also make sure that Eddie gets his own guys behind him. I thought it was a fantastic phrase by JP yesterday when he said we don't want this to be another blind date where you put two people together who've never met before, don't know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and you end up in a situation that we got last year with Neil Lennon, John Kennedy, Gavin Strachan nonsense. So Eddie Howe would be a fantastic appointment for me, and I think he should pick his doff as well. So I think it's exciting times. After the season we've had, it's good to have something that we can look forward to.
And just to not to encourage you to get too excited or get your hopes up too much, what is it
You're too late, I'm dead excited.
What is it specifically about Eddie Howe that kind of excites you? I'm totally on the Eddie Howe bus with you. He's always been one of my favourites going forward. I think he's a very modern thinking manager, but specifically for you, what is it that you think he could bring to the job?
I think you had a nail on the head there, Lorna. He's a forward-thinking manager. If we think of ourselves as a forward-thinking club, he would be ideal. And if anything you read about the guy, he's always comes across as a very impressive individual, very similar to the previous manager before Neil Lennon, maybe a younger version of that. I said, I think last week or week before that, I think he exceeded expectations, and that's what you're looking for in a manager. And everyone who speaks him very, very, very highly. I think he's technically, tactically astute. He's good with young players. He'll develop people. He's got an eye for a player. I mean, I don't mind who the manager is, as long as I've said before, it's some sort of evidence-based. That if Eddie Howe comes in and he falls flat on his face, I wouldn't blame the board for that. I think, in my opinion, and it's just about opinions, I think he's a good choice. He ticks a lot of boxes for me that Roy Keane didn't tick a lot of boxes. And if you're making, I think the three people that were getting mentioned over the past few weeks were Keane, Maresca and Howe. And if you compare, even if you know nothing about football, which is kind of me at times, if you compared Howe to Keane, and you knew nothing about football, and you say, well, here's one guy who's not managed a team in 10 years, and here's one guy who is in demand by the big teams down south. If you knew nothing about football, there's only one choice you would make there. Maresca was always a bit of a risk because he's never really managed any kind of level. But for me, as I said, I'm really excited about what's going to come next. I don't expect him to come this season, because if I was him, I wouldn't get near the team this season. It's not his team. And there's not a lot of upside for me. I think there's lots of downside. That if they end up playing the way they've been playing, and I think I said before, if we went to Ibrox and get a bit of a doing, then that wouldn't be a great start. So I think it's good for him, if we get him, that he's in the background, he's looking for players for next season, and he starts whenever it is. As soon as the season ends, Eddie's in the door. So yeah, I'm very much an Eddie Howe bus.
On that point, Laura, as well, a boy called Callum McFadden did an interview with Marvin Bartley, right? Put it online. This is what he said. This is what Marvin Bartley said about Eddie Howe, because he played with him at Bournemouth and he won League One with him. He was the first manager I had who I thought, this isn't a job for him, it's a lifestyle, because you put absolutely everything into being the best that you could be. That's what I want as a Celtic manager. It's not a job, it's a lifestyle. Eddie Howe's the kind of guy that would inject Celtic into his veins. And I said before the Rangers game, and I said that Robert De Niro speaks on Any Given Sunday, live it. You don't play for Celtic, you live for Celtic. And I think that's what Marvin Bartley's just described there, a manager that would live for Celtic. He said it's not a job for him, it's a lifestyle. And I think that's the challenge that Eddie Howe actually appreciates, because he'll not get a job offer like this, because it doesn't come with Sheffield United or Crystal Palace or Newcastle. He'll get lots of money at those clubs, but he'll not get the prestige and honour of managing a club like Celtic. And I think that's what Eddie Howe sees. Eddie Howe was once touted for the England manager's job at a very young age, touted for the Arsenal job, the Spurs job, the Everton job. He can come to Celtic and put himself back on top of the managerial world, so to speak, because I think, like Brendan Rodgers, he can come and reinvent himself at Celtic Park again. And by that, I mean making Celtic a noise in Europe as well. He wins a title in his first season, he's going into the Champions League. He has playing on a big boys' playground for the first time in his career. I think Eddie Howe can see that, and he likes the sound of that. And whoever he brings in, as Jim says, then you get behind them. But the very fact that he's willing to turn down jobs in England to get round a table and talk shows you that I think he's fully, at the moment he would seem to be fully committed to coming to Celtic and doing that. And it's just about getting the right people, as Jim has constantly banged on about, beside him. And I think that's what Celtic are currently doing now. Their due diligence, and what Eddie Howe wants, Eddie Howe should get.
Well, let's hope so. Before I go into the comments, so I'm going to correct you slightly, Tony. I believe it was Al Pacino in Any Given Sunday, not Robert De Niro.
Oh, God,
so before we get absolutely hounded,
I correct you.
Check your sources, Tony. Check your sources. But I was going to come to you, Tony, just to extend the kind of blind date analogy, if you like. Yeah. There's a Cilla Black in this whole situation. The only problem is we don't know if it's Peter Lawwell or Dominic Mackay. And that concerns me a little bit, I have to say. I don't know who's making these decisions. I would hope that Dominic Mackay is heavily involved in them, because obviously going forward, he's going to be the man in charge and he's going to have to build the relationships with these people that he's working with. Do you think, and obviously this is all guesswork, but do you think Peter Lawwell still has his finger in that particular pie? I must stress I'm not going on with the blind date analogy there when I say that, but do you think he's still heavily involved in that, or do you think that behind the scenes they have handed it more over to Dominic Mackay?
I think he wants to be involved. Dominic Mackay's start date's July the 1st, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, what better way for Peter Lawwell to go out by being partly responsible for bringing in Eddie Howe?
Yeah.
I think he would want that as well on his legacy. So I think he's pretty much involved. Dermot Desmond trusts him. At least this time Celtic are speaking to the right person. That's the thing. And I'm sure Dominic Mackay's involved as well. Eddie Howe has to meet all these people eventually, so I'm sure he'll have met them all. But the thing about it is, Eddie Howe's now talking about bringing in the likes of Richard Hughes And when you're that far down, I called it a runaway train, then you seem to think that, yep, it's going in the right direction, but people say, how are they not announcing it? It takes a long time for any kind of deal like this to be struck. Mm-hmm. All parties need to be happy. It's not just about money. It's about personnel, staff, budgets, playing staff, all that. So I think Eddie Howe's properly doing his due diligence on the club as well, and we're doing our due diligence on him. But both parties seem to like what they see at this moment in time. And I think Peter Law will have a hand in that. Why wouldn't he? Because he doesn't finish till the end of the season. So I hope that that part that he's playing convinces Eddie Howe that his future's with Celtic. It seems to be going along at a decent rate of knots, and all the indications are and signs are good. So here's hoping that they can get it over the line. As Jim says, until your man's standing holding a scarf, you're just not refusing to believe it, but you're just a bit not sceptical, but you're just a bit wary that it all goes flat or something goes wrong. So, yeah, but it's hard not to get excited.
Yeah.
He is a top-notch appointment.
Yeah, I think one thing that frustrates me about the group chat that we're in, or that I saw a couple of people commenting, was that they were underwhelmed by the potential appointment of Eddie Howe. Now, I don't know who you would be whelmed by, if that's such a word, if Eddie Howe isn't, a desirable appointment for you. I don't know who you're expecting to get in. But Jim, I'll come to you with this one. Robert Hyland on YouTube, and remember, guys watching on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube, that you can comment and you can watch there. Please share the show so that we can get it out to as many people as possible. But Jim, Robert Hyland has said, where is the director of football? Now, we've seen a lot of chat going on about Fergal Harkin potentially coming in, about potentially that Eddie Howe isn't willing to sign on the dotted line until he knows the structure of the staffing in the club and things like that. Do you think it's vital that we need to have a director of football in place before a manager, or vice versa? Which do you think comes first in this situation?
I think it's quite a complex situation. Nothing's particularly easy. And just on the previous question you said, I would like to think that Desmond and Dominic Mackay are the guys that are driving this, and Silla Law's in the background somewhere, because Silla's made too many mistakes on me. In terms of the structure, I think it just shows how complex it is. If you to say, who's your first choice? Do you want a good Doff, or do you want a good head coach, or do you want a good manager? And I think it's been really complex over the past few months. And I think if we can get somebody of the stature of Eddie Howe, then that comes first. You talked about the group chat. I think one of the people who was underwhelmed with that one was touting Jack Ross a few months ago. So we went from potentially somebody like Jack Ross to Eddie Howe, which is like a kind of seismic change. So Howe's in the top tier. If we could get a first-class Doff, whoever that may be, get him in first. But if you've got a choice between getting Eddie Howe in or a top-class Doff in first, for me, you get Eddie Howe in first. And then we'll sort the structure out. So for me, and it might seem a bit back to front, but I think we're dealing with a very complex issue, and a bit, again, about the fact that as fans, we don't really know too much about what's happening in terms of what the specific responsibilities are of a director of football, or a head coach, or a manager, or a general manager, etc., etc. It'd be good to see the job descriptions in terms of who's hit for what. Because again, we're very, very quick in pointing the finger at people, and maybe it's not their jobs at all. And I've said over the course of this season that John Kennedy gets a bit of a bad rap, but I'm still not sure what John Kennedy does. I'm not saying that's good, I'm not saying it's bad. All I'm really saying is, without knowing what his specific responsibilities are, it's hard to criticise too much. And the same goes to Gavin Strachan. For all you know that he's doing a really good job, one of the stories that came out after they did this review, that actually Gavin Strachan was one of the few people who actually passed that review. So, as I said, because we don't know the full story about things, it'd be great at some point in the future we actually get the full story about what happened this season. Mm-hmm. Because there's been so many things happened this season, and we've jumped to conclusions. And I read in the Tim's diary the other day, talked about if Peter Law and Scott Brown and Neil Lennon hadn't been there, apparently things would have been much, much worse. Mm-hmm. So you wonder what the hell's happening over there, and as I said, we do make comments and things. But to answer the question, if we can get Eddie Howe, he's in that top tier of managers, I thought we're out with our reach. We get him in first, and then we sit down with him. Dominic Mackay sits down with him and figures out the next step. And that's what I hope where we are just now.
I'm in that camp too. I think the manager's the most important football person at the club. any club. Once you got the right person and the manager, the rest follows. He'll be able to recommend a DOF, technical director, or whatever. And if you've got a manager of that calibre and a candidate like that, you listen to what they're saying and you bring in the person that they want. I don't see that being, that seems a kind of simple and logical structure and kind of path to follow. You're on the very top, getting Howe. So it'd be silly not to say, it'd be silly to say to him, you're getting this guy as your DOF. These things could be deal breakers straight away. So you say to Eddie Howe, we want you to manage Celtic because you're the most important man in this football club. You're going to head up all the football operations because we're trusting this managerial position with you. It's a wonderful club with a wonderful support and a wonderful opportunity. Who do you want? Who would you like to fill those roles? And I think that's the way that these negotiations should progress, or that's the way I see them progressing. If you're Dermot Desmond, Peter Lawwell, Dominic Mackay, you listen to a man who was once touted at a very early age as a possible England manager and still might be in the future. So, and everybody, as Jim says, alluded to, nobody's got a bad word to say about him. Klopp says he's one of the best managers that are operating out there. You listen to what he has to say, and if he says, I want this guy in as part of my staff, you bring them in. Because you're throwing a lot of resource at it anyway. So, you're not kidding on now. You're going to a serious candidate, and I think that's what the Celtic supporters wanted. I made the clip, we want an appointment, not a disappointment. This would be an appointment. So. Yeah,
I think I totally agree with what you're saying there. I think we talked about it before we came on. You don't, to paraphrase, you don't buy a petrol-powered Ferrari and put diesel in it. Do you know what I mean? You've got to, if you're going to push the boat out for the manager, you've got to push the boat out the entire way. And I think to pick up on what Jim said there, I'm not really sure what Kennedy and Strachan do, but one thing is for certain is that their presence hasn't helped deliver success this season anyway. So I'm not saying, I've seen a lot of hysteria online about get them out the door, get rid, whatever. I'm not saying do that, but certainly if Eddie Howe comes in and says, listen, thanks guys, but I'm going to get my own people in, I think you've got to go with that. I think that's what you have to do, because if you don't do that, then you're just kind of selling yourself short. And perhaps, from what I've read about Eddie Howe, he's not the type of guy that's going to come in and take a manager's job with that as the basis anyway. I think he's going to want all that sorted out before he signs on the dotted line. But Jim, I wanted to come to you. There's an interesting question there from Robert Ingram on YouTube. Celtic need to publish a manifesto for season ticket holders. Now, I know that you've been a big proponent of making clear what the plan is and making that, having targets there and having things to achieve. Do you think a manifesto like that for season ticket holders is something you could do? My only concern with that would be, you're putting in black and white what your targets are, and if you fail to meet them, you're making a rod for your own back. But what do you think about it?
Manifesto is a big word, same as vision. I think there's no reason why you should know what's happening so that we can measure. It's something that Tony, I think, has mentioned before about ambition. And what are the ambitions of the club and how do you measure success? And I think I said last week before, we should be setting out targets and then we can measure the club. And I'd have said that, that we now have another rival, a genuine rival. We haven't had that for a few years or so. So you can't expect to win everything all the time. But over a 5-year period, maybe we should have short, medium and long-term goals like any normal company would have. So over the next 5 years, as I've said before, you'd like to think we win the league maybe 4 times. Would you accept that? I think I would. Would you accept 3? A push maybe. European, where we go in that, Champions League qualifies for the group stages, how far do we go? I mean, I wouldn't expect them to put that kind of detail down in paper, but I'd expect something, because I think in the past we've put a lot of wishy-washy things out there about values and stuff like that are a bit vague, and it would be good to get a bit more specific without being too specific. I think it'd be good to know exactly where the club are going, and just to kind of maybe come back on a point before about, we're very much looking at this from a Celtic point of view in terms of us trying to sell the club, and Mr. Haggerty could sell the club to anyone, but if you're Eddie Howe, you're coming in here, it's a huge challenge. huge challenge this year. I think you have to go back to Wim Janssen's time, because when people mention about the John Barnes time and what Martin Hill came into, Martin Hill had a lot of good players from John Barnes. And because of how poorly we have planned things over the past couple of years, we're a total shambles in terms of what players are going to be left and the quality of those players. So it's a bit of a blank canvas for Eddie Howe. Now, he might see that as a good thing. He might see it as a bad thing. So I think possibly Eddie Howe's got a lot of thinking still to be done, whether he takes the job or not. But in terms of manifestos, I think it would be good to know what the club's expectations are, because I've also said before that I always think my expectations are a bit higher than the club's. I think the club's expectations in most seasons are not particularly high. And you can see that in terms of how long it takes us to sign players before the Champions League is a kind of obvious one. And I know it's a complex thing, but other clubs seem to do that. But year after year after year, we seem to make the same mistakes. And is that down to the current chief executive? I think a lot of the blame has to sit with him. So maybe a new chief executive will get things done a bit quicker, a bit better. And I think that's the hope for going forward. But in terms of a manifesto, yeah, good. Give us something. Don't just say, we're a club like no other and we're not for second best and all that kind of cliched nonsense. Give us something a bit more, with a bit more substance in it.
Yeah. Tony, just to pick up on that point that Jim's making, Frankie FAC on Twitter has said you can give a mission statement without giving all the detail. Now, for me, a mission statement would fall into that category of what we talked about before, of being a little bit too wishy-washy. But obviously you don't want to publish too much detail and give the game away, if you like. Where do you think the balance is there? There's got to be some sort of balance between, detailing everything to within an inch of its life and putting a slogan out there, like Jim says, a club like no other or whatever, that doesn't really mean anything but is trying to appease the fans in a kind of very superficial way.
Well, I think the first thing you would have to address is that you mean business and that you want to wrestle the title back from Rangers this year. That kind of thing. They're goals that you can achieve. They're achievable. So I don't think you can hide from that. None of this buying time malarkey. In terms of the European thing, then you can just, as Jim said, say you're targeting the group stages. They are achievable targets for a club like Celtic. You don't have to go into specific detail, But I think winning the title and targeting the group stages of the Champions League, would you not agree that they're achievable?
I would say so, yeah.
Or they should be. That should form any part of any manifesto or mission statement every year. You're not going to win you're not going to win the title every year. You're not going to reach the Champions League group stages. But it should be your mission statement every year. So that's you cannot hide behind that. That's not being vague. In terms of other things, then if you don't want to be too specific, so be it. But I think if you sort of let Dominic Mackay come out and say, we've got a 3-year plan to take Celtic into to become a force or a name in Europe again, as well as dominating domestically, then you would settle. You would settle for something like that. But as long as you sort of the structure and the kind of the way forward and how they plan on doing it and when they plan on doing these kind of things, So I think most people settle for that. But I don't think Eddie Howe's coming in to be given 2 years bedding in time and not to be successful. He's coming in to be successful, to hit the ground running. Because you don't target a manager like that and think, well, we'll give him a year or so to settle in. Because, as Jim has rightfully said, that your competition is Rangers. You should capably beat the rest. No disrespect to any of those clubs, but a club like Celtic should capably beat the rest. So you're competing against Rangers, basically, aren't you? Yeah. When manager worth their salt would fancy that if you beat your rivals, then you'll be straight into the Champions League group stages. That's a challenge and a half.
And I think as well, Jim, you said you get a bit of a hard time from time to time about, aiming too high and having too high expectations. I had the same issue when I first came on the podcast, talking about going abroad and looking at Ajax, looking at Porto, looking at these teams to see what they do right. I think that's where we have an issue amongst the supporters. Some people's, I don't think any of your expectations or my expectations are too high. But there is a sort of divide in the support as to what we expect from the club and what is too much. And I think I think if the club made clear what their aims are, it would stop all this kind of divide of people saying that's too high or that's too low or whatever the targets are. But until we see some sort of communication that way, then I don't know we're going to know one way or another. But we'll move on to the next topic. Now, I was very well behaved last week, I think. I think you'll agree. I was very gracious and complimentary about our outgoing captain, despite some of my my less than stellar opinions about him and less than complimentary opinions about him. But he's achieved so much for the club. Having said that, that is where I am about to blow my top about this current this current topic. I spoke to you guys about it on Twitter messages before we came on the show. I've been sitting watching with increasing frustration as the week's gone on. And it's an ongoing issue amongst the support. I think we have this inability to separate ourselves from nostalgia, from the idea that ex-players are going to provide us with something different, that people of an Irish connection are going to provide us with something different, that people who know the city or know the club are going to do that. And one of the ones that I saw, or one of the ones that continually comes up that really annoys me, is Paddy Roberts. Now, Paddy Roberts could produce a bit of magic from time to time. He was occasionally a very good player. He's not brilliant. And yet I see the clamour every summer. Every time another loan deal of his is cut short and he fails to deliver at whatever club he happens to be at, there's a clamour amongst the Celtic support to get him back. For what reason, I'm not sure. But it does frustrate me. We had the discussion about Jordan Larsson last week. There's been ongoing discussions about... I saw Colin this week make the very fair point that he wouldn't want Henrik Larsson coming back as manager because he could tarnish his reputation the way Neil Lennon did. My issue with Henrik Larsson coming back is I don't think he's done anything in his management career to merit the job. Rather than anything to do with tarnishing any reputation, I almost think he certainly would, because he wouldn't... I don't know that he would necessarily achieve what he wants to achieve. Having set you up that way, Jim, I'll come to you first. Do you think we have a problem amongst the Celtic support of placing too much stock on nostalgia and trying to apply it every time that we have these discussions about ex-players coming back or ex-players and ex-managers coming back for another shot at the club?
I think fundamentally fans are very fickle. You have your favourites and you have the guys you don't like, and the most important thing is that it's the right player who fits into the team structure. A lot of talk this week about Ayer, and Ayer's a fantastic player, but for me he's never a centre half. So it's not always the best players that makes the best teams, and I think you've only got to look across the city this year. If you look at their two centre halves, I don't think they're a patch in Ayer, but in terms of this season, they've been far more effective in Ayer. So I don't think it matters who you get back. I've used the phrase evidence-based in the past when talking about the managers. If they're a good player and they're going to fit within the structure of your team and you can get them and they're affordable and they're not going to cost too much money in terms of a transfer fee or the weekly wages and of the right character, personality, all that kind of stuff, they have to tick all... I mean, it's no different to getting a manager. They have to tick all the right boxes. Going for ex-players a lot of the times doesn't work. You've only got to look at some of the examples in the past 20, 30 years. People like Charlie Nick coming back, Frank McAvenny came back. There's two off the top of my head straight away. Andy Walker, another one. I know I'm getting back a wee bit here. You buy the best players for the team, and what you'll maybe find is that different managers have got different views on players. And we're all saying Ayer's a great player, but if Eddie Howe comes in and thinks, well, Ayer's not the kind of player for my kind of system, then Ayer won't be playing, no matter how good he is. But from my point of view, it shouldn't matter if they've played at Celtic Park before. That goes for the players and the coaching staff as well, and the board, for that matter. So.
Tony, I think what Jim says is right there about Ayer specifically. He's another one who I think he's had a decent second half to the season, but I think people have very quickly forgotten how at fault he was for a lot of our terrible performances in the first half of the season. And I think it's something that's a good aspect of the Celtic support, but can also be a terrible aspect, as we form very strong emotional attachments to players, sometimes almost at the expense of everything else that they show us on the pitch. Do you think do you think there's a case for this kind of ongoing Celtic connection? Or do you think it should be a case of looking at it the way anybody else would any other job, that we just bring in who's the best person for the job?
I agree with Jim wholeheartedly that you bring in the best players and the best players for that job. I'm very much in a minority here, but I don't think Ayer's a good footballer at all. For a man of his size and his stature, he does not command games. He's not very good in the air, and then he strides about 70, 80 yards with a football and doesn't know what to do with it because he's not a good footballer. That's just my own personal opinion. I've always thought that about Ayer. I might be in a minority, but I don't need to be told what I'm watching. That's what I'm seeing in Ayer. I just don't see a commanding footballer for a man that's 8 foot. He's a Harlem Globetrotter. You know what I mean? He should impose himself much more on a football field for my liking. And because he's not very good in the air and his positional sense is wayward, we've lost a lot of goals. So that's what I'm seeing. These people that are telling me Ayer's worth X amount of million, I would need a lot of convincing to be that. And if Ayer wants to leave, I would let him leave, because I don't put faith in building a team around Ayer. I would rather get the money in for Ayer and build a team around whoever you're going to bring in. It's just, as I say, that's my opinion. Might be not popular amongst the Celtic supporters, but that's what I'm seeing. I'm not seeing a great footballer. Might be, as Jim says, a better centre mid or whatever, but he's certainly not a central defender. I want my defenders to win the ball in the air and clear it on the floor and be positionally aware and not look cumbersome and lanky when they run 70 yards because they don't know what else to do and nobody kind of challenges them. And then when they look up, they get a nosebleed, they panic and they lose possession, then they're miles out of position. Don't tell me that you've not watched Ayer and that's happened nearly every game. And for a guy who's supposed to be a good footballer, he doesn't seem to be picking up and learning and adjusting. And if you could pick out these faults in Scottish football, then how are people saying he's the finished article and he can go elsewhere for X amount of million? It's beyond, but that's what I'm seeing. So, as I say, it might be unpopular, but hey, you know.
Yeah, I've said it before. I pride myself, and I think the Celtic support are very good at picking the difference between what I would say is a good player for us and a good player full stop. So your world class players that I think have happened to don a Celtic shirt for a period of time are, that I've seen anyway, are Henrik Larsson, Virgil van Dijk, Kieran Tierney. I would have put one. Who's that? Sorry.
Denier was a good defender.
Denier, yep. I would have put Wanyama in that category, but he happens to have fallen off the wagon as far as that's concerned. I don't think we're blinkered as far as that type of attitude is concerned, but I do think that we can fall into the trap of falling in love with a player and their attitude rather than, you know, their ability and seeing it objectively for what it is. Jim, that was something you brought up a few weeks ago, I think, as well, with the Sean Maloney thing, about him potentially coming as manager because he happens to have a career with Roberto Martinez. But again, I think, do you agree that it was kind of baseless? We don't really know what he does. It was kind of based entirely on the fact he was an ex-Celtic player.
Absolutely. No, there was nothing to that at all as far as I was concerned. But just to get back on the point that Tony's making about Ayer, I agree wholeheartedly in terms of Ayer as a centre half. He doesn't impose himself enough. He's not aggressive enough. And I'm a bit old school, as you might guess, in terms of defenders. I watched the Jack Charlton thing. If nobody's seen the Jack Charlton thing on BBC Two or that on the iPlayer, you need to watch it. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And Jack Charlton's very much old school. And one of the things he said was that he doesn't like centre halves who can play. He wants centre halves who can stop other people playing, and that should have been Shane Duffy, you know. And I think, as I said, that this year's champions have got usually two centre halves that stop people playing. And to me, I think football's a simple game. I think if you get two centre halves there who stop people playing, you've got a couple of guys up front who can score goals. You've got a goalkeeper who can stop the ball. I mean, see this whole sweeper keeper thing. This does my head in as well. You know, a goalkeeper who can just stop goals. That's it. And we had somebody like that in Craig Gordon. We let him go to bring in a sweeper keeper for $5 million. See these bonkers decisions. But to answer the question, sorry, Laura, I mean, I keep using the phrase evidence-based, and I'm sure people in the comments will be slagging me for that, going to shut up and stop saying that. But everything you do should be evidence-based. Who's the manager? Well, show us his CV. What has he done? Which players you want to sign? How many games has he played? Who's he played for? Played for his national team, etc., etc. It's all evidence-based stuff. And I couldn't understand the Sean Maloney stuff. Having said that, chance that he'll get the job next week. So
we'll be sitting here on the Sean Maloney bus next week, I'm sure. But I have to say, I'll take evidence-based over death by 1,000 cuts anyway. No, thanks everybody for your comments. Thanks everybody for your comments coming in. We're seeing lots coming in about Ajer. Jimbo 2167 on YouTube has made a great point there. He's a tremendous right back. He really was a revelation at right back, I thought, because perhaps he didn't have as many of the defensive responsibilities that he did at centre back. And I totally agree with what Jim was saying there about sweeper keepers and all that. It extends even right up to up front. In the modern game, everybody talks about how strikers, you need to offer more to the game than just scoring goals. No, you don't. If somebody puts on a plate for you, fine. That's my attitude anyway. Tony, you were going to say something there.
Wasn't Ajer brought in originally as a midfielder?
I think so, yeah.
Right. So and I'll cut him some slack in the sense that players, I've said this before, players have a natural position for a reason. I've never ever seen Ajer playing as a midfielder. He's been right back, he's been centre back, he's centre half, he's maybe played sporadically in the midfield, but he was brought in to do a specific job, and he hasn't done the job that he was brought in to do. So I'm doing him a disservice in terms of his defensive ability. Is Jim there? That's probably a player there in midfield, but we've never ever seen him in midfield, so we don't actually know. So, and that might be what others are seeing in him, like we see Balana watching him or whatever. No, I'm not. But to me, I just don't think he's been the player that I thought he would be at Celtic. So, but I guess, and I'm forming my opinions on evidence-based. I've watched them in football matches. So that's my evidence-based. I watch them and I watch them closely because I'm trying to see what other people are seeing. And this guy, and I can't see it. So, but, that, as I say, that's just my opinion. But I agree that, we have to just get the best player, but you've got a position for a reason. So that's what kind of gets me. Why has Ajer never been in the midfield since he came to the club? I just can't get my head around that. If he was initially bought,
I think as you said, Tony, he came as a midfield player, went to Kilmarnock on loan, and they played him at centre half. And then when we came back to Celtic, we had tons of midfield players, but not many centre backs. And it's a bit similar to Neil Beaton in a lot of respects. Not as many centre half, so you can play centre half. I actually saw Ajer has been a natural successor to Scott Brown. He's got good physicality. He's a big guy. As you say, he's about 6'6". He's got good feet. He's got a bit of pace about him as well. So I actually saw him as the kind of natural successor to Scott Brown. I'd like to, if he was to stay, and I know that's a bit of a long shot, and I would make him one of the highest paid players, and I would actually make him captain, and I'd stick him in the middle of the park, and I'd build the team around him. I know he's got his faults, but I think his faults are there as a centre back, and I think a lot of the goals that we've lost this season, I'm not saying it's all down to him, but I think it's about trying to organise your defence and who should be where. I think the goal we lost the other Sunday, he was at fault. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty when he plays at the back. Don't get me wrong, I think he's one of the guys that maybe wanted away, but you would never know that. And I think he's not been our best player this year. Obviously, there's not a lot of competition, but he's not somebody who's down tools. He's been right up for this season, and he's, and he'll never let you down. So I would like to see him stay, play him in the middle of the park, build a team around him. He's almost like kind of Vieira type player to me. So I would like I don't think we'll keep him, but it'd be good if we did.
If he's been our best player this season, then God help us, No wonder Celtic have had the season they've had.
David Turnbull would have been if we'd played him from the start, I'm telling you.
Yes.
But, But Manavchik25 on YouTube is saying Ajer started his career as a striker. I don't know if he's having his on there or what, but he seems to have been all over the place. He would be a bit of a Chris Sutton if that was the case. He used to play striker and then centre half, didn't he? And Dion Dublin as well. He was. I
I think when his first team he played with in Norway, they made him captain at 16. Mm-hmm. So you don't normally make captains of 16-year-olds. You know, I think he's got a lot of leadership qualities as well. So I think he ticks a lot of boxes for me. I know that me and Tony have got a bit of a disagreement here, but midfield for me, keep him, make him one of the highest paid players, build a team around him.
But Jim, I was basing all my evidence on his defensive qualities. That's what I'm talking about, you know. So, which you pointed out as well. I've not seen him as a midfielder, and I could possibly see that, and I see what you're saying, and I can see where he would fit into the team, because I think he's a big, imposing player, or he should be. He's a big presence. He has got the leadership qualities, as you say. And see, if you're a midfielder and you're running 60, 70 yards with the ball, and you're in the opposition box, you might have a shot at goal. You know what I mean? That going that way constantly, which he does. You know, but so I would probably prefer to see him there, to see if he can be the player that people maybe see.
Mm-hmm. Also, I think when you go back to Martin O'Neill's team, they said that was a team full of leaders. We don't have many leaders in this team, if any. And I think Ayer is likely one of the guys you would say he's a potential leader.
I think we've made that point before about, you know, with Scott Brown going, you would assume that the natural successor captain-wise, in terms of years of service anyway, would have to be McGregor or Forrest, but none of them strike you as having the personality to do that. So, you know, you've got to look at potentially, if we manage to keep Ayer, he would be one that you would be looking at potentially making captain, but I guess we'll have to wait and see how that goes. Thanks everybody for all your comments on Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. Remember, we're part of a State of Mind YouTube channel where there's a lot of different shows, not just football, but there's an ever-growing roster of shows out there for you to watch. So please get on the page, get subscribed and turn on notifications so you can be notified every time we go live or there is a brand new upload. Just to move on to the last sort of talking point for today. Now, I've seen a lot of talk around Kieran Tierney potentially moving to Man City, and again, this kind of ties in with the topic we were talking about before. I don't have a particular interest in where he goes or what he does. He's not a Celtic player anymore, and so while I want to see him do well, I don't have a particularly vested interest in where that is or what happens to him in that sense. But one thing that I did read, and this source for this was Pat Nevin, so we will take it with a pinch of salt. But he was talking about the potential for Tierney to move either to Chelsea or to Man City for a fee of around 80 million, which by his estimate and his knowledge around what the ongoing vested interest Celtic has in the finances there could net us as much as 12 million. Now, I personally think that is the way that we should be operating moving forward, developing these high quality young players, selling them for a big fee and making sure that we have some sort of financial payback for any future fees, and it can pay off so well in these situations. You know, if we happen not to make it into the Champions League next season, but Kieran Tierney moves to Man City for 80 million, then our costs are covered as far as that's concerned, and it's a model that you could rely on going forward. Jim, I'll come to you first on this. Ask you to put your accountant hat on for 1 second and say, do you think that's a viable kind of model for going forward? It kind of ties in the traditional development of young players that Celtic have always been famous for, as well as keeping up with the modern game and the finances therein.
I think that's the only way forward. I think the example of I think there's two issues to do with Kieran Tierney. Number one, you'd be hard pushed to find a bigger Celtic fan than Kieran Tierney. Mm-hmm. After 2 or 3 years in the first team, he's away, right? And I've said this before: don't expect players to stay for any more than 2 or 3 years. So don't get too attached to players, because that's the future. And I think you have to, put yourself in their place, and that's what I've said before on the podcast, that for them it's a job, so if you play with Motherwell, say, then your big ambition is to move to a team like Celtic, like David Turnbull's done, and once he's here, I'm assuming his big ambition is to move on, or is to move down south the next 2 or 3 years, and then to move to a bigger club. And that's exactly what Kieran Tierney's done. Came to Celtic 2 or 3 years, goes to Arsenal, and then maybe goes to a bigger club. So I think from a player's point of view, that's what's always going to happen. And I've said before, if I was managing Celtic's finances, I would be looking for younger players to come in 4-year contracts, and after 2 years, you either extend their contracts or you sell them at that point in time. Once you let the contracts drift on, you end up with not a lot of money, and that's exactly what's happened with tons of the players this year. And if you talk about somebody like Ayer and Edward, they've got 1 year of the contract to go. If we'd have sold them last year, obviously, obviously the fact that COVID's coming in, that's kind of like mixed things up. But under normal circumstances, if we'd have went to sell Ayer and Edward last year, we'd have got easily £20 million plus for them both. Mm-hmm. We've let their contracts run into the last year come this summer, and we're going to struggle to get the money we'd like to get. We're just going to get what people are going to pay us, unfortunately. And we have to be smarter. And I think we've lost a lot of money because that vision isn't there. And getting back to the vision thing again, if you say, well, this is how we do things, we bring in young players, everyone's on a 4-year contract, and after 2 years we decide we want to keep you, we want to sell you, we're not letting things drift into the last year of your contract. So I think that's my 2 points of view. From a financial point of view, that's what I would do. And also the fact that don't get too attached to players, because that's how it's going to work. There'll be the exceptional players, the kind of Scott Browns or the Lustigs of this world who will maybe stay on for a few more years, who maybe are not good enough to make that move. But if I'm a football player and I'm 20, 21 years old, that's what I would do. And I think anyone in any job, that's what you want to do. And the thing about football, the money's just bonkers now. I mean, to talk about £80 million, I know that's what people pay, but, again, I'm kind of old school again. I just think, if you were to ask a Celtic fan, what would be the most you think you should pay for a player? And maybe hand over to the chat room. What would be the most you would pay for a Celtic player? And I've said before, I wouldn't pay more than £3 million, because I think if you pay more than £3 million, it's an indictment of your recruitment and an indictment of your youth development as well. Because we play in a Mickey Mouse league, and I think if your scouting's good, youth development is good. So if your scouting is good, recruitment is good, you should be having. If you get your eye on the prize, then you're bringing in the Wanyamas and the Van Dijks, and not the Klamalas and the Ebu Kawasis of this world. But if you say to a Celtic fan, should we spend £15 million a player? I'd imagine every Celtic fan would say no to that. So what's your mark? What's the point with which you would say we shouldn't pay more than that? Because also we have to balance the books. Because if you don't balance the books, you might go bust. Right.
Yeah.
So balancing the books is very important. I know I sound like an accountant because I'm an accountant. You have to make that balance. And the same goes with the management team as well, because Eddie Howe's going to cost a lot of money. Yeah. With your own backroom team. And in any year, if you exclude European football, we bring in about £60 million. That's all we've got to play with every year. Mm-hmm. And you have to be careful how you use that £60 million. I know that Ivan Toney was getting mentioned before. I wouldn't have bought him, not because I don't think he's a good player, but the package I think that he was sold for, including add-ins, was about £10 million. He'd won £1 million a year, 4-year contract. So you're going to tie up £14 million in a guy who's played in the third tier of English football.
Yeah.
Not for me. If we'd have got him for maybe £2 or £3 million, 10 grand a week, yeah, go for that. So anyway, that's my piece. I'll let Tony speak now.
Tony, I think Jim brings up a great point there. The big frustration I have, and the reason I think this model of developing players and selling them on for a high fee works, is partly because financially it makes sense, but also because you can't tell me that we don't have a young striker who can be coached to be better than Patrick Klimala that wouldn't cost us £3.5 million. Do you know what I mean? Yep. It doesn't make any sense to me. What are your thoughts on it?
Oh, without a doubt, I mean, completely that. But I also think that we've got 25 million for Kieran Tierney, and I'm the only one that thinks that Arsenal got a bargain.
Yeah.
Because Kieran Tierney could probably have gone for a lot more money, but I think because he played in the Scottish Premiership, 25 mil is probably the most I think you could get for, I don't know, maybe. Jim, you probably better with figures than me, but 25 million is probably the most you could get for a player.
But that's something I've seen come up, to be honest, is people saying we should have got more than that. But surely there's an associated value with playing in the Scottish League that you can't exceed, no matter how good you are.
That's what I'm saying, right? So, but Kieran Tierney's ability showed he was worth more than 25 million quid, right?
Yeah.
Celtic knew that when they sold him. The fans knew that. And they told Arsenal, you've won a watch because this guy, and it's no surprise that he's going to go to Man City or whoever for 80 90, 100 million. You know, somebody said that they reckon Kieran Tierney could be one of the first £100 million players, and you're like, well, steady on. But the way the money is down there, it wouldn't surprise you. If it goes for an astronomical fee like that, you know. So, all of which Celtic will do better. But yeah, of course, Celtic should be bringing their own players through. That's the whole point. That, you know, Celtic for years had a production line of players coming through, young players, and then all of a sudden, when reserve football ceased to be, it just seemed to stop. And I've never ever been able to kind of get that production line back. You get one or two, maybe every 3 or 4 seasons, but there's no production line of talent yet. You know, the game's not changed. So what is it that Celtic are doing wrong that they can't? You say that they have to fritter £5 million on a jetty, 2 million, 3 million on Klimala, and surely there's youngsters at the academy that can do just as good, if not a better job. I can't understand why. Then is it down to the coaches? Is it down to the system? Is it, you know, what's the problem here? You know, why can we not produce our own players? Because as Jim says, then that's the way forward. It's an ideal world also as well, but they should be able to produce 1 or 2 players a year to come into the first team if they're doing it properly. Because that's basically why you have academies, to bring young players through, so that there's that kind of constant, you know, coming off that production. Here's the next one: a defender, a midfielder. You know, we're losing our captain. There's no youngsters coming through to replace Scott Brown, is there? Mm-hmm. That's
I think also, Laura. Sorry,
go on, Jim.
I think also, Laura. I think the fact we don't get into the Champions League often enough. I think if we're in the Champions League and our players are playing in the Champions League, then other teams will actually see those players. Because I think most big clubs, if you're going to buy a player, you're looking to see how well they play against good teams. And you can't measure Celtic players when they're playing against Hamilton and Livingston. But if we were regularly getting into the Champions League and also getting out the groups and playing the knockout stages, then people will see our players and know they can play at a higher level. So I think it's understandable. They're saying this guy plays in the Scottish League is a bit Mickey Mouse. However, if we were, you know, getting to the last 32, the last 16, and people like, you know, Ryan Christie were playing fantastically well, then he'd go for a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a big thing. And again, that comes back to the fact that we don't buy players soon enough to get into the Champions League. If we do the Champions League, we can sell players for more. And it's a bit of a domino effect. If you get that thing right, then all of a sudden all these other things fall into place. So, you know, exciting times. Eddie's coming. Good.
No, I totally agree. I think if, as we've all said, if you target European progress, the domestic stuff will take care of itself. But we will, we'll see how all that goes, and we'll certainly be keeping a close eye on managerial movements, Kieran Tierney's potential move, and everything else. I think we've raised more questions than we've provided answers today, but hey, that's what we're here for. Thanks everybody for watching. Don't forget, we will be back for the pre-match, half-time and post-match coverage for the Scottish Cup game tomorrow night, as always, here on AXOM. Thanks for all your time watching, commenting and subscribing, and we will see you again tomorrow.